Welcome back once again to another review of the Chiller TV original series Slasher. My name is Nate, representing Fright Flicks. Normally, I am joined by my partner in crime, Mike, who is off tonight working on promoting his original animated series for JoeBlow.com entitled Roomies. Al Pacino and Christopher Walken are roommates who are dysfunctional and cuss a lot. Boom. Sounds good, right? Check it out. Alright, let's get back to the topic at hand. Slasher. This was episode 5 of the 8-episode season entitled Ill-Gotten Gains. The theme of tonight's episode was actually backstory. Our protagonist, final girl Sarah Bennett, I believe, keeps digging more and more into her own past as she is so closely tied to the history of this killer. We also have her husband Dylan and his boss slash co-worker Allison, the publisher of the local paper. He's the editor-in-chief. Going national with media coverage of the executioner slayings, spinning it into something big. Once again, story. And then finally, to cap off the third point of this trident, the backstory of Ariel Peterson, the 15-year-old girl that went missing several years ago. Obviously, the way it's been built up, it has something to do with the ongoing executioner slayings. But how? Why? What? That's not all answered tonight, but we do get a little more information on this episode, all about backstory. Okay, let's start off with the main thrust of the episode, which was editor-in-chief Dylan and publisher Allison going full out with their coverage of the executioner slayings. They are trying to spin it into a major story, not only for the town, not only for the paper, but for both of their careers. They're being manipulated by a journalist who's higher on the food chain, and both of them realize this, but they don't really care that much because it's their shot. Allison hacks in to so-and-so's account and gets a bunch of very embarrassing text messages sent between two of the victims. Embarrassing not to them because they're dead, embarrassing to Officer Cam Henry. And to anyone that's been listening to this throughout the season, you'll know Cam Henry has been from day one my pick as being the killer. Well, his wife, June, was cuckolding him with the guy that got bit up by snakes. We find out at the beginning of this episode that June has been torn apart by rats or wild animals of some kind. It is a pretty nasty corpse. No denying that. Well, immorally and illegally hacking these tweets, or whatever the hell they are, gets Allison and Dylan enough coverage to draw the attention of the executioner himself. He leaves a message for Allison and ends up showing, as promised, for a legitimate interview. Old Condom Head allows himself to be recorded on tape and has a discussion with Allison about the case as ongoing. It's a pretty good scene. What the executioner is getting out of it remains to be told. This is Slasher, so everything is a little bit more heavy-handed than it needs to be. From the jump, this episode, I knew Allison was going to be the victim of the week. There was no question about it. The only question was what sin would she be executed for? And during their interview, her fate was all but sealed when she straight up told the executioner she had no sins, nothing she should be punished for. Even if that was true, that's not what you say to Condom Head. It's just not what you do. It ends up coming back to haunt her, of course. She leverages her interview with the executioner into a major deal for herself, but then, instead of getting into the limo that was assigned to her, she gets into a limo that is driven by the executioner. The resources this guy has, he's like Jigsaw. He just has whatever he needs whenever he needs it. This is a fully stocked limousine, and he's driving it around in his Condom Head mask. And no one, you know what, doesn't matter. So Allison ends up having her throat slashed, her head cut off, and then it is thrown into the deep fryer at the local McDonald's, just to make it more biblical-like. Meanwhile, completely disconnected from her husband's investigation, Sarah keeps investigating. She and her best Scooby-Doo buddy break into the office of the preacher, the father of Officer Cam Henry. They do so because at the wake for his daughter-in-law, this guy is way too happy. I mean, it's obvious. He's way too chipper at this point. So they break into his office and they find a quote-unquote murder kit. Her words, not mine. Got some rope in it, got some hammers, got some nails. No zip ties, no ceremonial daggers or anything like that. So I rush to judgment and calling that a murder kit, but she calls it a murder kit. She and Scooby-Doo buddy end up stalking this guy. He's the major red herring for this episode. He's obviously the major red herring for this episode. And it's a terrible red herring, I gotta tell you, because all of his suspicious behavior, which is rather suspicious, ends up being covering up that he goes to see a dominatrix who inflicts pain on him. He's a masochist. A preacher that's, a masochist, he's not doing self-flagellation, he's paying a woman to do it for him. Okay. And the hammer and nails, it's because he convinces this dominatrix to actually crucify him. So that explains all his suspicious behavior, right? He's in the clear now. He's just a preacher that gets off on the old crucifixion. Yeah. And let's polish this off with the big reveal of what happened to Ariel Peterson. Do we know 100%? No, we do not know 100%, but we know a lot more after this ending. As you know, from the beginning, I've always criticized this show for its terrible endings to its episodes. They just sort of stop, it's very forced. Last week was the best ending they've had yet, and this week's ending tops it. And let me tell you something. A hot ending covers a multitude of sins because it leaves me walking away from the episode thinking about the episode's best part, the very end. That makes me a lot more excited for next week. Although the episode itself wasn't very strong. Okay, so the very end of the episode, we see the chief of police, Cam Henry's boss, go home. He's a dick to his wife. A cop is a dick to his wife. Whoa! Shocking. All right, I'm just making a joke. But he walks past his wife. He goes into his basement. He's Canadian, so he gets himself an ice cold Molson's. And then he opens up the secret room in his basement where a several years older Ariel Peterson is there singing a song to their son. Did the chief of police abduct her? That's the implication. I can't say that for sure. The chief of police definitely has been keeping Ariel Peterson prisoner, and they have a son together. That's right. In the last 30 seconds, Slasher went full room. Full room. And I'm not saying it ripped off the movie Room. The two projects were probably made concurrently, so they have nothing to do with each other. Incredibly creepy ending, gotta tell you. What does it have to do with the executioner? I don't know. Doesn't matter. The Ariel Peterson subplot really has some zip on it now. I can tell you that. How do I rate this episode? It's difficult because there was a lot of just slowing through some plot stuff and some backstory stuff. They telegraphed who was going to get killed, and then you had to wait and wait and wait and wait and wait for her to get killed. Although the head in the deep fryer bit, pretty cool. Somebody eats a deep fried ear. Does that mean that the executioner battered the head before he dunked it in oil? I don't know. Maybe they'll answer that one next week. But even though there was a lot of weak shit this episode, I really loved the ending. It topped last week's ending, and it finally felt like there was a bit of payoff, which was nice. It's not the payoff we're looking for, but it's nice. I'm going to give this episode a 6 out of 10. It's hovering close to a 7, but I honestly think it's just that the ending was strong enough that it covered, as I said, a multitude of sins. Let's just stick with the 6 out of 10 for now. Ill-gotten gains, still pretty solid episode all the way around. Which brings us to the killer theories aspect. Just to refresh, Mike has been banging the drum all season that the final girl, Sarah Bennett, is actually the killer, which they've definitely raised the flag of that on the show, pointing out time and again that the killings started after all these years, right after she moved back to town. They also very heavily cast suspicion on her husband Dylan in this episode. They also heavily cast suspicion on the priest. They also eliminated the priest as a suspect with the dominatrix deal, which the priest always felt like a red herring, and I think they just confirmed that. To me, he's out of the mix. Dylan, he is definitely in play, and he's a strong call. They overtly threw a lot of shade on him this week and made him look guilty, which, you know me, that means that makes him look more innocent. Meanwhile, Officer Cam Henry, my main suspect, was a bereaved spouse this week. That poor fella. However, he's still completely unaccounted for during all executioner sightings. All executioner sightings, Cam Henry is unaccounted for. That speaks a lot. Me, personally, I'm sticking with my gut instinct. I'm not trying to read too deep into this. I watched the pilot episode. I was like, yeah, that's the dude. That's the killer. Episode 5, sticking to it. He's still the killer. Is Dylan a viable suspect? Yes. Is Sarah a viable suspect? Yes, she is. I'm just sticking with Cam. Cam Henry, my first pick, my final pick, until he's dead, which, who knows, could happen next week. You never know. Speaking of next week, join us next week on Fright Flicks, where we come back to review episode 6 of Slasher. It is entitled The One Who Sows His Own Flesh. Love the titles of these things. My name's Nate. Check us out on social media, Fright Flicks, on Twitter or Facebook, or look for me personally under Nate Flicks. The easiest way of all to make contact with me or Mike, just post a comment to this video. We will respond. Until next week, I'm Nate.